Persecution and sanctity go hand in hand, and this was especially true for St. Benedict, who could have easily become a martyr, and martyrdom is a great glory, but not as glorious as St. Benedict's life. Sometimes it is even more glorious to survive martyrdom and switch roles. But I'm not going to spoil it for you. Let's start from the beginning. Oh, after the story, let's do some detective work to find out who killed him. Now you all must be confused. But it will become clear in a moment with my new magnifying glass. So, St. Benedict was abandoning his beloved monastery together with some of his disciples, while a messenger caught up with them with the news that the priest who lived nearby had died. Now St. Benedict, upon hearing this, wept and wept. And then he corrected the lack of sympathy on the part of Brother Maurus, who announced to him that news. Brother Maurus even had to pay a penance for not mourning. Why was St. Benedict so dramatically mourning the demise of this priest? Well, to understand that, we will have to go back in time. So, let's go to the very beginning of the story. Since his childhood, St. Benedict was famous for his miracles, precisely after he miraculously fused together the broken pieces of a sieve that his governess or nanny had broken. So, in order to find peace amidst the myriad of requests for miracles, he fled to the wilderness, where he lived as a hermit in a cave at Subiaco. But that did not solve his problems. After the abbot of a nearby monastery passed away, the monks who were left without a leader invited the hermit from the cave to become their new abbot. St. Benedict was initially reluctant to accept the offer, but eventually, believing it to be God's will, he agreed. However, his period at the monastery proved to be quite difficult. The monks, accustomed to a more lenient way of life, were resistant to the rigorous routine of prayer, work, and silence. They found the strict discipline that St. Benedict introduced to be disagreeable. So disagreeable that they decided to poison his wine. But St. Benedict, always trusting in God, as soon as he had made the sign of the cross, as was his custom before meals, the dreaded goblet shattered into pieces. He immediately knew that this was an attempt on his life and took it as a sign. He left the monastery for his greatly missed solitude in the desert. But his fame grew so far and wide that many young men from important families around the region flocked around him to live a life like his, and soon he had a following in the wilderness, where he instituted his famous rule, giving rise to the Benedictine order. His rule is used even today by many monastic orders. And I'll tell you a secret. Even the customs of the Heralds of the Gospel were inspired on the rule of St. Benedict. That is why St. Benedict is one of the patron saints of the Heralds of the Gospel. St. Benedict performed many miracles. He even resurrected a novice monk who was crushed by a wall that fell on him. The dead body was brought to St. Benedict in a sack, because it was so utterly crushed that no one could even recognize it as a body. And St. Benedict not only resurrected him, but even restored the body to perfect condition. Now, as it so happens with great men, St. Benedict had enemies. Enemies who envied the happiness and success that are born from virtue, but at the same time, they are unwilling to suffer like men to obtain that happiness from God. Florentius was one of these enemies. He was a priest from a church in the region around St. Benedict's residence. Now, Pope St. Gregory the Great, who narrates the episode, says he was possessed by an evil spirit. And he had many tools with which to disturb the apostolate of St. Benedict. To name just one, he would deviate people from visiting the saint by publicly criticizing his discipline and way of life. But it was all in vain. All his efforts against St. Benedict seemed to have the opposite effect. The more he would attack St. Benedict, the more people would adhere to St. Benedict and avoid this Father Florentius. Abyssus abyssum invocat. Deep calls to deep, as we see in Psalm 42, verse 7. In simple terms, sin provokes bigger sins or more sins. And that is what happened with Father Florentius. This evil man could not take it any longer. He didn't think twice before poisoning a piece of bread and sending it to St. Benedict. St. Benedict received it gratefully because he wanted to save the soul of Florentius. But he immediately perceived that it was poisoned. So now comes the part of the famous raven. Many of you who are watching have noticed a raven on the St. Benedict medal. Do you use the St. Benedict medal? Want to know more about it? Do you want to know how to use it properly? How to make it more effective? What do those intriguing inscriptions mean? If you answered yes to any of these questions above, I have good news for you. Father Timothy is doing a novena to St. Benedict, in which he is answering all of these questions. And most of all, it is a time of prayer and an occasion to grow in piety, strength, and fortitude against the devil. It will show you how to put fear in the enemy. I'll leave the link for the novena in the description below. Don't worry, it is totally free and online, so you can participate from the comfort of your home, or even while going to work or traveling. So don't hesitate to use the link in the description below. It might be just what you need. It may also help protect you against poisoned bread sent to you by your best enemy, like in the case of St. Benedict. Remember we were talking about the raven? So, St. Benedict had this raven that would usually accompany him at mealtimes. St. Benedict, with the spontaneity and innocence of a child of God, nonchalantly ordered the hungry raven to take the poisoned bread to a place where no one could be harmed by it. The raven was just as surprised as you are, and at the beginning shrugged and squawked and began fluttering around the cursed piece of bread as if to say he couldn't do it. So St. Benedict ordered the raven again. Take this bread without fear and go cast it in a place where no one can find it. Finally, the raven gave in and flew away with the bread. The raven returned 3 hours later for his reward. I can't help but comment here. St. Benedict was really awesome. And I think that the word awesome is an understatement. He is, properly speaking, biblical. His feats were like that of the prophets of the Old Testament. Anyway, back to the narrative. So what was St. Benedict's reaction to the assassination attempt? He was more grieved at the state of the soul of his enemy than his own life. So he patiently bore all the offenses that he received from Father Florentius. Patience, however, was only a word for Father Florentius. So in his fury and determination, he decided to pervert the disciples of St. Benedict by something really sinister, especially for those days. Can you imagine? He hired 7 indecent women, dressed no better than animals in the wild, to enter the garden of the monastery of St. Benedict. Here is where St. Benedict's weakness lay. He could bear every form of insult and injury, but this one thing he could not do. He could not risk the salvation and sanctity of his followers. So he decided to give up the fight, and together with his monks, he abandoned their beloved monastery and went in search of another shelter. St. Benedict was defeated. Father Florentius was gaily chuckling and rubbing his hands together when he heard the news of St. Benedict's parting. Finally, that holy abbot wouldn't steal his prestige anymore. But what must have been the thoughts of our Holy Father St. Benedict? He had only one thing that caused him regret. He didn't regret leaving the monastery or risking the morale of his followers. His regret was the loss of Father Florentius. He considered everything a failure because he couldn't give God the soul of Father Florentius. But he couldn't risk the souls of his sons, whom God had entrusted to him. And he had to choose the lesser evil. So he had to abandon Father Florentius to his destiny. Now back to Florentius sitting in his gallery, rubbing his hands as he celebrated his victory, for he was now firmly established as the sole ruler of the souls without any rival. His house remained firm and secure as a rock, while the gallery in which he was sitting gave way and collapsed, crushing the enemy of St. Benedict. One of St. Benedict's disciples immediately sent a messenger to St. Benedict, who was already on his journey, though not far away from the monastery. We can imagine the relief of St. Benedict upon hearing this news, but to our surprise, he wept. Sound familiar? Yes, it's the scene that we mentioned in the beginning. My magnifying glass is twitching. It's time to solve the mystery. Why did he lament so much? Because it was his personal enemy. The priest had a personal hatred for St. Benedict, and St. Benedict was being especially nice to him because of it. It's very easy to use excuses to justify our personal hatred for someone. For example, we have a neighbor who is envious of us, but this colleague also doesn't pray the rosary. We could easily justify our ill treatment of this person by alleging that we are being mean to the person because they don't pray the rosary. But in reality, I am mean to that person because he is mean to me. And that's not Christian charity. It is so subtle, but so true. I see this a lot in my apostolate. If we are really honest with ourselves, like St. Benedict was, then we will always keep in check our self-love. Sometimes it is necessary to be aggressive, and sometimes it is necessary to openly correct someone. But we cannot mix it with our personal revenge. And that is what St. Benedict wanted to teach to his monks with his attitude. And he continues to teach us all, even today. And with Our Lady's help, we will be able to follow his example. But we must be careful not to misinterpret this episode. That evil Florentius died as a chastisement from God. Now, let's look through the magnifying glass. St. Benedict didn't resurrect the evil priest like he did with the young monk who had been crushed under the fallen wall, because that priest had already chosen his destiny by envying the grace of St. Benedict. God punished this evil priest on St. Benedict's behalf, since the saint couldn't do it himself. So sometimes we have to be aggressive, like in the case of St. Peter, as we read in the Acts of the Apostles. St. Peter rebukes Ananias and Sapphira for being dishonest with the Holy Spirit, because they had sold a piece of land they owned and told him, St. Peter, that they were giving all the money from the sale to the church. But in secret, they kept some of it back for themselves. And upon St. Peter's reprehension, they fell dead at his feet. Like St. Peter, St. Benedict was not soft with evil when it was not directed against him personally. For example, the time when he hit a wayward monk with a rod. Remember? Oh, sorry, that's for my next video. Now that is going to be an exciting episode. St. Benedict knew when to be violent and when to be patient. There were quite a few aggressive episodes in St. Benedict's life. I'll try to cover all of them with my trusted magnifying glass. We will learn some incredible lessons and discover some hidden truths for our spiritual life and for our apostolate with others. So, see you next time, and Salve Maria.